Coaches, when you're delivering these types of pieces to your classes, it's not important just to be able to say what you're doing, but how you're doing it and why you're doing it matters most, because that is how you get an athlete to get the most from this session and to advance, again, from that beginner to that fire breather. Welcome back to Team Misfit HQ, Team Misfit Coaches. Today we are talking about a feature that you're going to find in the competitor extra for this phase, what I like to call pre-fatigue gymnastics. Now, once an athlete begins their journey of trying to develop these higher level skills, at first they're going to want to do these things completely devoid of intensity. Skill sessions, EMOMs, things of that nature. But when it comes time to develop a robust capacity or increase the athlete's capacity in your class, this is one of our favorite ways to do it. It's what we like to call, again, pre-fatigue gymnastics. So something you'll see throughout the skill sessions that are in this phase are a little bit of cardio or muscular fatigue ahead of one of the gymnastic movements that an athlete is going to pick based on perceived weakness. The coaches should work with athletes to figure out what that weakness actually is and what the best rep scheme and approach is. And that's really what this video is about, helping athletes sort of slot into one of what I would say 4 categories exist. And then coaches can work with those athletes to make sure that they're getting the most they can from this session, because if you run before you learn how to walk, you're just setting yourself up for a long-term dysfunction in your gymnastics movement. You're not going to get better at it. So I'm going to go through 4 different categories: fire breather, RX athlete, intermediate, and scale. Then I'll kind of give you a glimpse behind like what kind of athlete that is. And we'll start with fire breather first. These are going to be the folks at your gym that are at the highest level, the ones that always constantly crush the metcons. They do everything more or less as prescribed and don't really struggle to have any of those movements. So in this circumstance, you have some pre-fatigue. One of the easiest ways to make it a little bit more challenging for those athletes, tell them to do the monostructural conditioning a little bit harder. Get a little bit out of breath, but again, don't lose sight of the focus that this is still about gymnastics. So while they might increase their speed, gymnastics are still the focus, so make sure that speed is appropriate for where they are in their fitness journey. And again, a lot of those athletes will have context for how this is supposed to go based on other pieces like, they're gonna do 8 rounds of 200, 1,600 meters of rowing. They'll know about how fast they should go. So that's one way to approach it. Second way, slightly bigger sets than the average athlete. They can go a little bit bigger, but again, we want to harp on the idea of perfect sets. We don't want to go so big that technique breaks down. And then last but not least, you'll see a range of rest 1 to 3 minutes. An athlete like this is trying to build capacity so they can do this set of gymnastics always on demand. We want to start to eliminate shorter and shorter rests, so they wouldn't be on the 3 end of the rest, they'd be closer to that 1 minute. One step back from there, the athlete that does the majority of the workouts RX, but maybe is still struggling to kind of develop some of those higher level skills, or really hasn't had, consistent muscle ups, handstand push-ups, things of that nature. Tell them to go a little bit slower on the monostructural. Have them be more deliberate with their pace and try to hang the exact same split in terms of time on every single round, so they're not, again, smoking themselves out and impairing their ability to do the gymnastics. So a little bit more consistent on the row pace, maybe a little bit slower. And now we're looking at small to medium sets. Where the RX athlete might be thinking 5, 7s, 9s, and 12s, this athlete's probably thinking 2 to 8 reps, somewhere in that range. And this is an athlete where maybe 1 minute rest is not appropriate, but 3 minutes of rest might feel like too much. So they're gonna kind of live somewhere kind of in the middle. Step back from that. You have your intermediate athlete, an athlete that does some workouts RX, but probably a lot of them scaled. You're gonna tell them to go really slow in the machine if you give them this version. Really slow. Again, this is just to give them some pre-fatigue. As coaches, we like to think of ourselves when we put talk to our athletes about how to do something. And oftentimes you're like, oh yeah, a 2-minute split in a row is easy for me. It may not be easy for one of your members, so you might have to dial them back even further. And what's great about this is with this intermediate athlete, if it goes really well, say, go a little faster next time, go a little faster next time. And each time they go through, they can get a little bit quicker and start to build some confidence while still working on the gymnastics. Sets are real small here. 1 to 2 to 3, not very big at all. And we're looking for long rest. We want to have these athletes enough time to recharge, think about how they moved, and then try to reevaluate and tweak things from round to round so they get better at it. Or, this may be appropriate as well. You have an athlete who's still getting the hang of a new movement. Maybe pre-fatigue's inappropriate for them. And you think, you know what? The best thing for this athlete is to build some confidence with just the gymnastics movement by itself. So we're thinking about that athlete that maybe has like 1 or 2 kipping pull-ups, and maybe they're gonna practice 3 kipping pull-ups for 8 rounds, where the pre-fatigue might just not make it possible for them to do that thing. This is kind of like a bridge the gap between scaled and beginner, but it is an option for you coaches out there if you're like, you know what? The intermediate feels like too much, scale like doesn't feel like enough. Here's kind of that middle ground. And then last but not least, your scale or beginner. When you have a beginner at your gym, we want to make sure we build foundations very, very solidly before we advance to higher skills or higher fatigue, because you're trying to set them up for long-term success. So when you have an athlete that's like this, we're thinking no pre-fatigue. You're going to do 8, 10, 12 rounds, whatever you think is the appropriate amount of volume for that athlete, but there's no pre-fatigue. They're basically just gonna do a round of a gymnastics movement using ultra small sets, even smaller than maybe your intermediate athletes. And for a lot of these athletes, the best bang for their buck is gonna be strict movements. Banded strict pull-ups or strict pull-ups, push-ups or elevated push-ups, handstand push-up holds or handstand negatives. These are gonna be things that build the foundation to eventually move from scale to beginner to intermediate to RX, to fire breather. So again, coaches, when you're delivering these types of pieces to your classes, it's not important just to be able to say what you're doing, but how you're doing it and why you're doing it matters most, because that is how you get an athlete to get the most from this session and to advance, again, from that beginner to that fire breather. All right, coaches, thanks for watching. We really hope this whiteboard breakout helps you deliver a more effective version of this workout to your classes. Make sure that you tag us on Instagram at Team Misfit Gym so we can see your progress, and we'll see you in the next one.